Welcome to the August Roundup. Let's start off with the Umbra Grade Axes that I painted throughout the month. This is the unit that wraps up my Stark collection, and tracking these down was a real pain, as anyone else who plays this game can imagine. Simon and their distributor Asmodee have what I would charitably call mercurial distribution practices. So the set that I eventually tracked down was an international copy from an Italian company, with data cards in every language except the one I speak best. That meant that I had to go into the War Council app that has all the info for all the cards, write down the updated entry for the 1.5 edition, and physically label their info onto the cards in English with stickers. I guess it's worth it. It's messy, but at least you can read what they're supposed to do. Having done Umber units before, I followed the dull red color scheme that I chose for my Berserkers. I ended up highlighting it a lot more than I did with the first unit, really wanting crisper colors and avoiding the ruddiness that I was aiming for initially. I do kind of like it, and I enjoy the boldness of it, and I might go back and repaint my Berserkers if I ever feel the need. The flag on this one came together well. The last one just felt a little too dark, so I went over the shaded colors with another round of basing after the wash, creating that really neat dark outline effect that made the shouty man really pop out on that red flag. The fun in this unit was constantly playing mix and match with beard and fur color. I was always aiming for variation on my units, so I constantly go back and try to avoid the same combo in the same model, haggling with different combinations of gray, black, and brown. I hear that these boys have been significantly nerfed since they came out, but having never played them before, all I can do is pop them onto a list and see how it works. Sir Marin Trant had a lot more silver in his design than some of the other Kingsguard that I've done, with the odd bit of gold here and there. Maybe it's just because it's a return to form of standard armor units, but I kind of like the silver of his helmet and pauldrons. It makes him look a lot more martial than the more decorative white gold. The plume in his helmet was blue to match the background of his particularly grim coat of arms, a hanging corpse. And painting in the tawny beard was fun. I do like how menacing the sunken pits of his eyes look underneath the helmet. In my continued quest to paint graying hair realistically, I tackled Ahmed from Cthulhu Death May Die. It led to a somewhat blotchy beard and mustache, but baby steps. I'm not sure if I need a smaller brush, a steadier hand, or more patience, but I'm prepared to keep working at it and get those lovely Reed Richards graying temples that I've always wanted. The mustard suit was a bit of a challenge. I know that yellow surfaces are difficult, and so this was all about building gradients of light colors. It might have turned out a bit brighter than I hoped, but I'm not sure really how to dull it down, so I washed it and called it a day. In between all of these other units, I also painted up 4 regular rank-and-file bandits for use in D&D games. They've since found themselves into a Friends Miniatures collection, so you'll just have to take it on faith that I made them at all. After completing that investigator, I decided to tackle the Cthonhian itself. This was an intimidating monster in every sense of the word. So many angles and changes in consistency and texture. I didn't really know how to approach this thing for the longest time. A lot of painting guides that I watched go for a more greenish shell on this thing, the spiny H.R. Geiger-looking exoskeleton that it's covered in, but I chose more of a fleshy color. Dry brushing was really my best friend, helping me pick out all that detail and making it look weathered and slightly glistening. I tried to capture a smooth transition between the chitinous shell and the fleshier mouth on the top and the bottom. I really do love that lower mouth. They remind me of those gruesome worms that killed the cook in the King Kong remake by Peter Jackson. I finished up the whole thing with a little bit of gloss to make the fleshy bits look wet and dripping. Maybe I'll dull the teeth down if I ever do something like this again. They do kind of stick out as needlessly bright. Need to add some yellow in there. But I actually am quite happy about how this thing came out, and I'm looking forward to getting to the rest of the monsters in that set, which is why I bought the board game to begin with. Next was another Kingsguard, Sir Erris Oakheart, and I bounced around on his color palette. A lot of the lesser Kingsguard cards have primarily gold in their armor, and I'm trying to follow the card art to make them look more or less one-to-one. That's how so much of it found its way onto his model. At this point, the Kingsguard were getting kind of samey as we get into the less character-reputable ones, so there wasn't much but the yellow plume of his house to tell them apart. Next was another Cthulhu investigator, Sgt Wells. This boy was a fairly easy blob of olive drab, but I enjoyed the wrinkles and the crags on his withered face, picking them out with brighter colors to make him look truly ravaged by time. The eyes were oddly difficult, partially due to the sculpt and also the asymmetry of his one blinded dead eye. I also like the little khaki pouches that he's got on. And now, in between all of that, we can talk about the Necron warriors that I painted. These are the very first of what I tackled from the Indomitus box. I really like the new models in terms of dimensions and the spindly menace they can bring to the table, but I always enjoyed my Necrons looking more crisp and unnaturally slick looking, untarnished by the ages and shaking off the dust of aeons with little visible wear and tear. These new ones really lean more into a techno-zombie mindset and have much more wear and tear, scratches, nicks, and the occasional missing body parts. I ended up aiming for the more intact-looking construction options, snipping away some of the damage and gore and shaving off more damaged parts to make them look more composed instead of decomposed. The new Zerakin color scheme inspired me to revisit the somewhat bland scheme of my original warriors that were just a simple gunmetal. Deciding to lean into a more varied look, I introduced a more coppery gold paneling into their armored sections along their limbs. Since I like to play my custom dynasty as Nefrek most of the time, I can explain this as the transmutive metagold that allows even the lowliest warrior to teleport themselves that's been inlaid into their armor. I think that the dynastic colors of purple and black can be reserved for those of higher rank or tactical value. I went for a colder, corpse-like green glow on the weapons, less yellowy than I've done before and closer to white. I ended up using Hexwraith Flame to achieve the effect with a little dot of white in the center. It's a lot more grim and stark looking than the Gauss glow that they have started selling from Citadel. I'm looking forward to more complex models with a chance to nail down my new paint scheme. I want to see what black and purple can look like on the models and how to best distribute it. Next up is Sir Boris Blunt's, and all of these white cloaks are starting to run together. I saved one of the particularly dumpy-looking minis for Sir Blunt, famously out of shape and toad-like in terms of knights. Decided to complete the look with the only color that hasn't been claimed at this point, a plume of red. I'm sure Jamie would be furious if he ever bothered to wear his own helmet. Then there was the kid from Cthulhu. Dots, 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 dots. The first step of this miniature was going crazy enough to actually attempt it, and then it was all about planning out a pattern. I went with vertical stripes, one by one, and it was meticulous work, but I think I ended up with smaller dots than intended, and that just meant more work than I needed. Some of them were a bit malformed, but part of my painting strategy is about knowing when to fold them so I don't burn myself out. I think it looks very decorative. I did really like how the flames turned out on this mini, using the same glazing technique I used in Rasputin. Hoping this will hold up as I start on more incendiary units down the line. It really does look like it's giving off light. The shape of her face is kind of creepy, a bit simian looking, but I liked how the eyes came together. Maybe that's what kids look like these days. I honestly couldn't tell. I haven't seen one in months. It helps that the eyes were larger than usual on this model. It really helped me get detail in there. Then we come to John Morgan from Cthulhu. There wasn't much to this guy beyond picking out the right shade of beige for his khakis and his shirt. It might have ended up looking a little fleshier than intended, but I think it might look good blending into the desert locales of where he's supposed to be hanging out. Squeezing eyeballs underneath a wide-brimmed hat is still a skill I have yet to perfect. Between this and the Severina Rain monitor that I painted a few months ago, I think I'm getting better. In between all of this, I also painted a single zombie from Zombicide. I'm trying to get some friends into miniature painting, and that means showing them how to paint zombies for practice. I do still have quite a lot of zombies. This is the one I painted. He is green. And finally, the last of the Kingsguard, Sir Preston Greenfield. I wanted to put a lot more silver and steel into his look, and ended up focusing it in his helmet. For some reason, he looks a little more threadbare than Sir Marin Trant, but such is the fate of a dude stomped to death by an angry mob. I am not losing sleep over him. And with the last of the Kingsguard finished up, we arrive at King Shitlord himself. I was at a loss on how to paint Joffrey Baratheon, but figured he would reverse the colors of his supposed house, wearing mostly golden stags on black, as a true edgy teenager would. Picking out the golden filigree on his tunic was an exercise in patience, but the sculpt helped me a lot, with little faint designs to guide my hand. The detailing on the hem of his cape is largely improvised. I was just going off of a little squiggle of color I saw on the box. Now that the entire Kingsguard is finished, I can happily field this unit. All the little bits of personalization within the unit itself turned out great, and I like how multifarious they appear, but centered around the black tones of King Joffrey. Just a wall of white to protect this idiot. This unit is absolutely brutal on the tabletop, so long as they can withstand the capricious whims of their king. I have been playing the sprawling board game Gloomhaven with a base of friends for the better part of 2 years now, and as our mission list begins to dwindle, I've picked up the expansion pack that came with a new character, the Aether Enchanter, in a desperate attempt to keep the magic going for as long as possible. The model art for this thing is very colorful, and most of those colors are blue. I tried to blend one color into another in a few places, especially the hot pink into the sky blue, in order to get sort of an effervescent look, like she's not entirely focused. The only area I feel I really skimped out on was the sunburst pattern on her pants, which I opted out in favor of simplicity. Yeah, she has polka dot shorts now, but it's all part of her whimsical look. Also, her eyes were a challenge. They are supposed to be pure black with a corona of light around them, which I tried to do as best I could. Picking out all those little tattoos on her body was actually kind of fun. Final model I painted this month was Sister Beth from Cthulhu, which also wraps up all of the Cthulhu characters that are human. I wanted to make her outfit dark without making it entirely black, and ended up painting her habit with a deep navy, kind of like a crimson fist with black-gray shading, and highlights of the initial color. She looks a bit grim and dour, but hey, she is a nun. That concludes all the miniatures that I painted this month. I'm actually amazed at the amount that I was able to put out, and all up to my standard of quality too, which might not be saying much, but I think it looks pretty good. I always wanted to paint at least one miniature every day of the month, and I actually succeeded that with 39 total, which is pretty crazy. I also quite like the amount of variance in everything that I put together. Pending models that I picked up this month consist of the new Baratheon units, the Rose Knights and the Hrillior Faithful, for Renly and Stannis' factions specifically. I also picked up the Gloomhaven miniature and painted that up the same month that I obtained it, so I guess it writes itself off. Let's talk about totals. The 39 models that I painted this month, a personal best, put me up at 195 models painted this year. I think I'm actually gaining ground on my pending list. 26 models pending this month, putting me at 255 total. Hopefully that I can keep that low as I approach the end of the year. I actually managed to play 2 games of painted models with friends this month. First of all was an Ice and Fire game, where my stalwart Baratheons managed to hold the line against a circling horde of Targaryen cavalry and eke out a victory. Then later we played a round of Cthulhu, where me and my friends managed to defeat the titular Sleeping One and not all horribly burned to death, a personal best for me again. Looking forward into the coming months, my usual monthly purchases are Song of Ice and Fire minis in an effort to snap them up before they vanish for months at a time. And there don't seem to be many slated for the upcoming September, so maybe that'll give me some time to catch up. I hope to see you then.